Hey there, welcome. My name is Dr. Greg Celaya, and today we have a very special guest. We have Dr. John Purcell, and he's head of vegetable seed R&D for Bayer Corporation. And before we get started, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below, and also hit the bell to be notified of any future videos. And make sure to leave a comment so we can have a conversation. John, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you again, Greg.
So we met over at the International Society of Sports Nutrition conference this year, and it was very interesting because you were one of the keynote speakers, and I found it very interesting the different things that you were talking about.
I appreciate that. It's a great opportunity for us to really talk to an audience that's so important because you guys are interacting. The folks are interacting with consumers and with their clients around the world, talking about nutrition, and veggies are a big part of nutrition.
Yeah, it is. And why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit about your background? You sent me a bio, but I think it's going to be better off served by you.
Sure. So I've been in the food and agriculture space for over 30 years. I wasn't one of those kids that grew up on a farm. I actually grew up in a city, Washington, D.C., but I spent summers at my aunt's corn and soybean farm. And that's where I kind of got the bug for, pardon the pun, the bug for agriculture. And I've been in this business for, like I say, over 3 decades. I love it because it's great because the science is really cool, but we're working on things that are so important. And that is producing food and producing it in a sustainable way. And I've been in our vegetable business for most of the last 10 years. And I think that business, Greg, is really cool because it gives you probably the easiest connection to consumers because a lot of people grow tomatoes and peppers and things in their backyard. So it's great. It's a great way to have a conversation about food and where food is produced and what people are looking for from their food experience. And I don't just do this professionally. My brother and I also have a ranch in Montana, which is cool. He runs it full time. I just help out when I can. And that helps me too because when you're connected with somebody who is directly producing food as he is, you really get a great sense of the challenges that people that are producing food for us face every day. And it helps me do my job better thinking about how do I help farmers produce food in ways that consumers want.
Nice, nice. So when I was doing a little bit of homework on you, I saw you had a few videos out there, and one of them was you're making pepper tequila in an Erlenmeyer flask. And I thought that was great. He's just a scientist. He's got all this stuff in his kitchen as he would in his lab.
Yeah, well, that's fun. I think we do a series of cooking shows on LinkedIn and Instagram and other things, and it's a way to kind of make things fun for people, but also talk a little science. And for me, that's fun. And yeah, what I do is I take our different products. So we have onions, and I made onion rings. Just did a video in Italy on fennel, making fennel salad. But I will say probably the most responses I got was my Purcell 4-pepper tequila. It seemed to strike a chord with people, where I take hot peppers, habaneros and jalapenos and serranos and chilies and infuse tequila with that. And we enjoy it occasionally, and it's pretty tasty, actually.
Yeah, and there's some other eating fresh videos that you did as well. In fact, I liked one of the shirts you had on. It's similar to a shirt you have on now from that company. Explain to me that company.
Yeah, so Seminus is a brand. So Bayer Crop Science is obviously our corporation, but to most farmers, there's 2 brands that we sell our seed under. Seminus is one of those brands. That's the brand that really services our customers who produce in open field and in net houses and sort of lower technology kind of operations. And then we have another brand, DeRouter Seeds, and that brand is really focused on high-tech glass houses. So 2 different kinds of markets, both important for vegetable production. And what we try to do is provide the kind of brand experience that they need. So Seminus and DeRouter are the seed brands, and Bayer is the corporate entity that owns those brands.
You know, it's interesting. I think most people don't really understand what it is to be a producer of seeds and foods. And there's so many things you have to really take into consideration, right? The farmer, production, packaging, health, nutrition, shelf longevity. I mean, the list goes on. And it's something that you talked about at our conference that I really never thought about.
Yeah, Greg, it's interesting because, I spent a number of years in large row crops, soybean, corn, cotton, those kinds of things, where a lot of that is geared toward yield, it's geared toward productivity because you're flowing into a commodity stream. In the fruit and vegetable space, you can't just be worried about yield. You have to really be worried about the entire chain, and you have to satisfy the needs of the entire chain. It has to have the kind of characteristics that make the grower successful, but somebody's got to walk into a grocery store and say, I want that tomato, I want that pepper. And then it has to be a product that's amenable to good use by the chain too, as they supply those retailers. So you really do have to consider everything, as the old expression goes, from farm to fork. And that's what's really fun about the vegetable business and in the seed part of it, because it all starts with seed. At some point, somebody's putting a seed in the ground to start the whole process rolling.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that you were tasting, I guess it was at a show or something like that, you were tasting some other farmers' honeydew, and it was fantastic. And he gave you a honeydew to take home, but by the time you took it home, the thing was bad.
Yeah, that's a huge challenge we face. And I think that's really one of the things we have is when you're tasting things and they're fresh and they're ready to roll, everybody's excited about it. And, it used to be, I'll age myself here, but used to be you only bought certain things certain times of the year, right? This was tomato season, or this was peach season, this was whatever season. And you just expected that, okay, you had them for that 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 2 months, but then you'd go on to the next. Whereas now consumers are really looking for that same experience year round, which gets us into really thinking about how can we produce crops in different production systems, indoor and other things, but also how can we produce crops that ship well, and also how can we produce crops with pretty diverse characteristics as far as what kind of growing environments from a weather perspective that we can grow. Because consumers aren't just looking for things a few weeks a year now. They're really looking for that same experience year round.
Yeah, I think it's something that most people don't think about. And at the conference, you had some different produce there for us to taste. And one of them was the cantaloupe, right? I think it was called the sweet spark cantaloupe. Is that what it was?
It was Crave melons, and I can't remember which one we actually had there. But yeah, we have a number of different melons that have come out now that we're trying to get people to understand. Yeah, there are some good tasting melons out there. But the challenge is, how do you have them produce enough at the grower level? How do they ship well enough, and how they end up tasting like that? You were tasting them fresh. We brought them right from the farm, but you want them to have the kind of shelf life, which is what we do in our melons now, the shelf life to allow you to enjoy that taste for even a longer period of time.
Yeah, you're right. It was the Crave. And you also, I think you had peppers there. I didn't get to do the peppers, but the Crave melon was pretty.
Yeah, the just sweet peppers I think we had too. So, yeah.
Okay. The Crave melon was fantastic.
Oh, good to know.
And you and I mean, we got in a conversation because my concern is, how is it that this melon hasn't been in existence before, at least not that I know of or have tasted before? And it was a real interesting conversation. How do you go about making a melon like this that seems to have all the characteristics that people are going to want to have?
Yeah, and I think, and Greg, I know you and I had this conversation, and this is what people think about the way for many, many years, and still happens, is a lot of the way that farmers get compensated is by the kilogram. It's how much can they produce, and then how well does it ship. What's happening, though, is I think for many folk in the industry, we're trying to provide that kind of yields that are attractive to growers, but have the taste that will bring the consumers back so that they'll actually consume more melon. But from a biological standpoint, it's difficult because in some cases, what you have is yield and shippability aren't necessarily tied to those melons that taste the best. So through the advanced breeding technology we have, through the ability now to understand how do you bring all that great germplasm together and genetics together, we're now at a point, because of all the incredible advances that have been made in understanding genomics, understanding genetics, we're able to bring now together, melons that yield well for the grower, but also have the kind of taste that consumers are looking for. What we're seeing is really the benefits of a whole lot of biology that's happened over the last 10 or 20 years. And some of it's, crazily enough, it was really fueled by the Human Genome Initiative. It was that ability to get massive amounts of information about genetic sequence, about gene structure, about how genes operate. Well, that same technology applies to fruits and vegetables and to crops now, where you understand a lot better about how you combine genetics so you, for our case, meet the needs at the grower level, but also have great tasting melons. Great to hear you enjoyed it too. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was great. And my occupation, I practice functional medicine, and part of my scenario is dealing with chronic illnesses. And when you deal with somebody with a chronic illness, they're usually turning over every single stone to figure out the causation or the partial causation of their health issues. And, we had talked, you and I had talked about a little bit about genetics. And one of the big concerns that a lot of patients that I'm dealing with have is, what's happening with our produce? Is it being Frankensteinized, right? Like Frankenstein type of produce. And, You made mention about the cantaloupe and how it was produced. Is that something you can talk a little bit more about?
Sure, absolutely. And I think one of the cool things about this is, what it really is just a better way to do breeding. So, people have been breeding crops for thousands of years. It's just now we're able to do, before what you would do decades ago is you would take everything out in the field. You'd see how they performed. You'd make your cross. You'd then look at the next generation. And it was incredibly labor intensive. And it was also very difficult to get the exact combination. What we're doing through advanced breeding now is because we understand what the genes are that involved, and this isn't talking about GMOs. We're not inserting genes. We're just understanding what the genetic complement is within that melon or within that tomato. But by understanding better and using molecular techniques, so in the laboratory now, we can test for any number of different characteristics. So before we ever go out into the field, we already have predictions that say it'll perform well on this and this. What that allows you to do as a breeder then, if you already know you've taken care of all these, you then say, okay, now I can focus on taste. I can focus on shape, on color, on size, and all that, the more complex characteristics. Because many of the now, the easier genetic traits we're looking for, we can now test for in the laboratory and say, aha, we already know it has this. These are the ones we want to use in our breeding program. So it's really accelerating our program. And it's also really allow us to focus on those consumer and quality traits much more than we used to be able to, and in a much more efficient manner, because we can do so much now with testing in the laboratory before we ever take it out to the field. But it's not GMOs. It's not inserting those. The GMOs are a great tool on a lot of the big crops, corn, cotton, et cetera. They have great benefits for growers. But for vegetables, we use basically advanced breeding technologies. But it's still, the basis of it is getting it down to the genetic level and the compositional level to understand what's happening in that plant, so you don't have to do everything so laboriously just through multiple cycles of breeding in the field.
So bottom line is, there's no genetic mutation, so to speak. It's basically hybridization, but you're doing the testing in the lab before you bring it to the field and grow a crop, right? Is that what I'm getting?
That's right. And I think one of these you got to recognize, though, one of the things that allows this to happen is people don't recognize there's a lot of genetic variation in nature. And what this allows us to do is really take advantage of that. So for example, there's peppers we've now bred that have resistance against the disease Phytophthora, which is a very damaging disease. Well, there's some exotic peppers that have that resistance. You would never want to eat those peppers, but we can use them then to incorporate that part of that pepper into our peppers so that they have that same resistance. So it's a way to actually take advantage of tremendous genetic diversity that's out there, but bring that into the kind of quality and the kind of all the other characteristics that the grower and the consumer need. But it's using advanced breeding techniques, what some people call molecular breeding, but all these advanced breeding technologies are really cool, and it's totally changed the game over the last 15, 20 years in breeding.
Well, how do you do that type of selective breeding? Let's say that pepper. How do you isolate that portion of that product to match with another product that's desirable?
Well, what you do is you look for what we call molecular markers. What they are basically flags. It's basically a sequence within that genome that says, aha, if it has that sequence, then it's going to have that trait. And so what you then do is it just goes back to breeding at that point, where you're actually making selections that have that. But being able to test that in the laboratory greatly accelerates it, because you're not going out in the field testing it to see if it's resistance against that disease. You're actually testing it and say, aha, it's got those little flags. We look at the sequence, boom, it's got them. Those are the ones we want to put into our breeding programs. So it's basically an easy way to identify the traits rather than having to go out in the field and test for them. We know if it has those what we call molecular markers, we know it's going to have that trait. And that's why it accelerates the process so quickly. But it's exciting, using tomatoes for tomatoes, peppers for peppers, et cetera.
So what do you think that type of technique, as far as time, knocks off in the production of that product?
Oh, multiple years. And we're still anywhere from 6 to 8 year cycle on this, but you're having it. In some cases, even, some crops are 15, 20 years to get out there. It used to be. But because you have these molecular techniques now, you're basically, in some cases, shaving 2, 3, 4 years off. Some cases, you're cutting it in half as far as the development time. And it's just getting better. And frankly, the age of biology, it's fun. I'm a biologist, and I think about, in my 30 plus years in this field, how many advances have come about. It's a really great time to be in biology. and whether applied for human medicine, like your case, or applied for crop for crop biology, it's a really, really cool time because of the incredible power of the biological tools we have out there now.
So in other words, that cantaloupe I tried a couple months ago most likely was in basically R&D probably, 5-10 years ago?
That's right. That's exactly right. So you got to have a little patience for your R&D, but it's also fun because it's an iterative process too. You're testing, you're trying. We're going out with growers who are producing it. We're doing consumer taste panels to see how they respond to it. So there's a lot of steps in that process. But yeah, somewhere between 5, 7, 8, 10 years, depending upon how many traits we're looking at, before it makes the marketplace.
So the R&D expense on just every single product has to be pretty big.
It is, and I think, and that's what we love about. So this week, for example, we had a showcase where we invited not only our customers, but really people from out the whole food chain out to our farm to show, kind of display the technologies we have, the investments we make. We also invited over 20 other companies to show new technologies they have, things like robotics and automation and new irrigation techniques and all that. But it's great to expose people to, here's the story behind the story, if you will. You taste the melon, this is great. Well, here's what it took to bring that to market. And I think it's very important for people to understand that's why the investment is as high as it is, because it does take a lot to get that to the market. And the other cool thing about this, Greg, is that what's happening is there's a big shift now. We've obviously been participating on the genetic side or the seed side, but it's really now about bringing together all the tools, because with shortage of labor, we need robotic and automated harvesting. We need tools to understand better flavor and sensory experiences and things like that. So there's a whole lot of technologies flowing into this besides the genetics that make for a successful product. But that's right. It's not a cheap game to play, but it's great to be able to bring those kinds of products that people like and enjoy. The farmers like them, but consumers enjoy eating them. That's the best of our world. So.